Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei Awakens Ancestral Sword. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Issei accused Vali of being with the Cows Brigade. Vali Lucifer, host of Divine Dividing and the current White Dragon Emperor, answered calmly from beneath his balance breaker. Everyone could sense his grin. He said he was disappointed that his rival had been duped and seemed weak, but Issei ignored the taunt. He had people to protect, with Rias and the others foremost in his mind. Azazel reminded Issei that balance breaker could only be used for a limited time. Issei nodded, mentally thanking Azazel later for the bracelet he had given him, and remained surprisingly composed despite having lost an arm. The boosted gear roared as Issei activated the Welsh Dragon Overbooster Balance Breaker. He was covered in his incomplete balance breaker for the second time. The first had been at Rias's wedding to save her. Determination hardened his expression as he charged at Vali. Vali remained calm and taunting, which only fueled Issei's anger. He lunged with a fist, but Vali waited until the last second to counter. The blow was deflected by Issei's helmet, and the fight accelerated. Albion's call to divide began to drain Issei's power briefly, but Draig answered immediately and his energy surged back, allowing him to land a punch to Vali's gut. Vali responded with a headbutt that sent Issei reeling, then followed with an uppercut and a flurry of strikes that kept Issei on the defensive. A knee to the chest and another blow sent Issei skidding backward to the ground in front of Rias and the others. He gritted his teeth and got to his feet. Vali spoke with clear disdain, saying Issei had once been merely an average student and even now, as the Red Dragon Emperor, he disappointed him. Issei snapped back. Vali admitted he wanted Issei to grow stronger but implied that Issei's master was not suitable. When Issei protested on Rias's behalf, Vali reacted by summoning 2 balls of blue energy and launching them toward Asia. Issei boosted and leaped in front of Asia, taking the attack for her and being flung backward several meters. Rias and Asia called out in concern as Issei staggered to his feet. He reassured Rias that he would not disappoint her, and her small, worried smile strengthened his resolve. Draig answered with a double boost, and Issei, shouting encouragement to Draig, charged at Vali again. Vali stood amused, waiting to receive the attack, and Issei felt he had his rival exactly where he wanted him. Issei extended his left arm and summoned the dragon-slaying blade Ascalon from his gauntlet. Vali's eyes widened and he dodged 3 strikes, but Issei pressed the assault and landed a 4th hit that sent Vali crashing into the ground. Vali remained standing although his balance breaker had been temporarily disrupted. Vali wore a cocky grin that mixed joy and excitement. He brushed at his mouth, showing no serious injury, and revealed that his divine dividing still remained. He warned that it was not over and activated the Vanishing Dragon Balance Breaker. Draig observed that dragon battles did not end until one combatant was dead or unable to continue, framing the clash in that brutal tradition. Vali charged again and caught Issei off guard, knocking him back with a punch. Albion's divide drained Issei's power and Vali's barrage pushed him into retreat. A roundhouse kick knocked him down hard in front of Rias and the others. Rias cried out in alarm and tried to run forward, but Surzek stopped her, warning that the fighter's power had reached a level that could devastate the area. Rias insisted he needed her, and Issei, teeth clenched, vowed that he would not fail her. Vali watched the exchange with malicious amusement and commented sarcastically on the trust Issei placed in Rias. Issei defended Rias fiercely. Vali then spoke cryptically, claiming that Issei's master had been using him, that she did not care for him and had let him die to gain his power. Issei rejected the accusation, insisting that he chose to fight for Rias. Vali pressed the point, suggesting that Issei had only suffered injuries and received little more than a word of thanks. Anger propelled Issei forward. He threw a punch but Vali dodged, then headbutt him, destroying his helmet and exposing his face. Vali gripped the neck of Issei's armor and accused Rias of letting him suffer, alleging she had known Yuma would try to kill him and had done nothing to stop it. The accusation stunned Issei into silence. He paused and thought, allowing difficult questions about his reincarnation and circumstances to surface, questions he decided to set aside for later. He powered up and broke out of Vali's grasp before the two of them began a clash of power. Vali taunted, asking if Issei was going to question his precious master. Issei replied that he would, but not now. He needed to focus. Drake boosted Issei's power several times, and Issei threw Vali back before slipping into a trance-like state. The only thing he could feel was how perfect Ascalon was in his hand. He watched Vali charge and vaguely heard his teammates urging him to dodge, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the blade. When Vali swung a haymaker, Issei instinctively angled his head and slashed with Ascalon. The blow struck Vali's armor and left a visible crack. Everyone watched in shocked silence. Vali wore a grin, perplexed by the change in his rival but not displeased. Before the confrontation continued, a barrier broke and a teenager named Biko appeared. Biko accompanied Vali through the breach and advised Issei to grow stronger, predicting they would fight again in the future. As Vali disappeared, Ascalon was sent back into the gear, and Issei came out of his trance. He asked Drake what had happened. Drake explained that Issei's ancestor's blood had begun to rise and told him to return to his group so they could figure things out. Issei nodded, descended to the ground, and received a supportive group hug from the girls. 2 months later, Issei sat in sadness and shock as he waited for Tannen to appear for the second day of training. Drake wondered what they should do, suggesting the possibility that Vali had been telling the truth and asking whether they should run. Issei rejected the idea of running, reasoning that it would only paint a target on his back and that he was far from strong enough to protect himself. He decided to stay and work his way up the ranks. The bond with his club was the only thing affected, and he would not abandon it. Drake informed him that he had examined Issei's blood and DNA and discovered he was a descendant of Kenshin, the greatest swordsman the East had produced. During the fight with Vali, Issei had unconsciously drawn out a latent sword ability. Drake then proposed a method to transform Issei into a dragon without the usual excess energy problems, which would vastly increase his base stats and offer a chance to reach higher levels of power. Issei was amazed and planned to ask his parents about any heirlooms. He asked what the proposition entailed. Drake explained that he would use the magic from Issei's evil pieces as the cost for the change, ensuring there would be no detrimental effect on him. Issei agreed, determined not to be a pushover any longer, but then felt a searing pain in his chest and passed out. An hour later, Tannen arrived. After a brief explanation, Tannen began channeling his aura into Issei to assist with the dragonification process. A week later, Issei woke with a groan and was immediately overwhelmed by a flood of new sounds and scents that triggered a pounding headache. Tannen asked how he felt, and Issei said that aside from the lingering headache, he felt amazing and much more powerful, then asked for details. Drake outlined Issei's new composition, roughly 60% dragon, 30% devil, and 10% human. His bones were denser, his muscles stronger and more flexible, and his senses far sharper, extending for kilometers. His brain processed information much more quickly, his magic reserves rose from nothing to the level of an upper-tier being, and he developed an almost godlike affinity for fire. In appearance, he had grown a few inches, his hair was longer nearly to his shoulders, and his eyes had changed from brown to emerald green. Drake added that he had brought out Issei's ancestor's blood during the dragonification, granting him exceptional talent with blade arts, and that Tannen had martial styles prepared for him. Issei asked how much time remained before he had to return and what else he needed to work on. Tannen outlined 3 goals: mastering his new draconic body, learning blade techniques from Drake's knights, and unlocking his balance breaker. There were 3 weeks left before his return. Issei pointed out that this seemed like a lot to accomplish in such a short time. Drake explained that he and Tannen would create a time-lapse barrier for training so that 1 week outside would equal a month inside, meaning 3 weeks of outside time would provide roughly 3 months of training inside. Relieved, Issei cheered enthusiastically as the intense training PRD began. At the end of the training, Tannen asked whether Issei would return alone or if he wanted a ride back to the estate. Issei replied that he would go alone. He could not remain dependent on Tannen for everything. Tannen shook his head with mild amusement and flew off toward his territory. Issei turned and set off toward the Gremory lands. As he flew, he examined his torn outfit and untamed hair, and decided to honor his ancestor by adopting his battle style, a kimono suited for combat and his hair tied back in a ponytail. He landed inside the Gremory gates and walked toward the courtyard where everyone had been gathered after their training. He leaned against a pillar and waited for the rest of the peerage to appear. A few moments later, he felt the presence of the knights and wordlessly nodded to them as they came into view. Their auras told him they were stronger than a month ago. Kiba and Zenobia stared at Issei in shock. He was taller, more muscular, and his aura radiated far greater power than before. Kiba commented that the training had been interesting, addressing him as Issei. Issei replied lightly that the training had been intense and that Tannen had been a harsh taskmaster. Asia entered and blushed at the sight of Issei's torn shirt that revealed his new musculature. Issei raised an eyebrow at her but said nothing. She had been among those who had wronged him, and he remained impassive toward her. Rias arrived and attempted a hug, but Issei told Rias that he was not in the mood. Everyone was taken aback by his bluntness. Aquino joined them soon after, and the group returned to the Gremory compound to freshen up. Issei walked down the hall behind the maid assigned to show him to the room where he could prepare for the upcoming meeting. The maid announced that they had arrived and asked if he needed anything else. Issei told her to call him Ise and requested some battle kimonos and a few ponytail accessories. The maid blushed at his smile, nodded quickly, and hurried off. Issei closed the door, undressed, and went to the washroom for a hot bath. The warmth eased the cramps in his body and he drifted into sleep in the tub. A couple of hours later he was shaken awake by Grafia, who informed him that it was time for the meeting about the results of his training. Issei asked for 15 minutes before joining them. Grafia, seeing him unusually calm and not reacting in the way a habitual flirt would, raised an eyebrow and left the room. He rose, dried himself, and studied his reflection. Compared to a month ago, he was noticeably more powerful, a swimmer's build that balanced strength and speed, a sharper jawline, and emerald eyes that now held a determined glint. He smiled inwardly and silently thanked his dragon, then changed into a regular shirt and trousers and walked to where the rest of the peerage waited. He greeted the group and Azazel and took an empty seat. Azazel opened the meeting and explained that they would discuss the results of their month of training, starting with the king and working down. Rias reported that she had spent the month studying tactics and reviewing many old raiding games, and that she had several new ideas to try in future raiding matches. Azazel then asked Aquino for her report. Aquino said she had increased her magical reserves and broadened her elemental repertoire, gaining control over fire, wind, water, ice, and earth. When Azazel asked about the specific task he had assigned her, Aquino replied tersely that she had practiced it but would use it only as a last resort. Azazel frowned but nodded before turning his attention to Asia. Asia explained that she had extended the range of her sacred gear and learned several defensive barrier spells. Azazel asked how far her healing powers could reach, glancing at Issei, who listened in uncharacteristic silence. Azazel noted that this Issei was not behaving like the old one, who would have been more expressive. Later, Issei dressed in a red battle kimono and waited for Tannen to arrive to escort the Citri and Gremory peerages to the venue for the young devils' meeting. Footsteps approached, and the blushing orc girls appeared. Issei remained stoic and offered a simple nod of greeting. Rias frowned at his lack of emotion and struck a small, elegant pose to present herself. Issei replied that she looked beautiful as always in a normal tone. Aquino teased him not to praise only their leader, then moved closer. Issei said that everyone looked fine, gently eased Aquino away, and leaned against the wall. His eyes found Gasper, who had chosen feminine party attire. Gasper explained shyly that he felt comfortable dressing that way. Issei told him to grow out of the habit and addressed him like a younger brother. Silence fell as the girls looked awkwardly at Issei, who stood with his eyes closed and seemed distant. More footsteps signaled the arrival of the Citri peerage. Sona greeted them and said it was good to see Rias. Sona pointed at Issei and asked if he was Rias's new piece. Rias replied with a sigh that it was nice to see Sona and that the young man was Issei, not a new pawn. Issei had become noticeably more attractive, and Rias was frustrated that he seemed to be giving her only a fraction of his usual attention. She decided she would speak with him and find out the reason when the time was right. Sona acknowledged that she had almost failed to recognize him because of how much he had changed. Saji approached Issei and demanded to know how he had become like this, addressing him by his family name, Hugh. Issei explained that he had trained seriously and suggested Saji try the same. The others treated it as the familiar banter between peers. Saji then asked teasingly whether Issei had made any progress with his king. Issei answered that nothing noteworthy had happened. Saji complained that the leader was too strict and it was difficult to get close to her. Issei wished him luck, and Saji returned the sentiment. Issei then admitted quietly that he did not need luck because he was no longer pursuing that goal. Saji demanded to know what he meant and drew curious looks from the others, but a loud thud announced the arrival of Tannen, the retired Dragon King, and attention shifted to greet him. The peerage members stepped forward to welcome Tannen while Saji continued to glare at Issei, who ignored him. Tannen greeted Rias and Sona, complimenting their appearance, and Rias thanked him for his escort to the meeting venue. Issei felt his heart racing and wondered what was happening to him. Drake suggested that what he was experiencing might be love at first sight. Issei protested, pointing out all he had survived and endured recently, and Drake countered that those experiences had been different because Issei had trusted too easily before. This time it was his draconic instincts guiding him. Drake noted that in a room full of powerful females Issei had only reacted to one person, which spoke volumes. Convinced, Issei resolved to speak with Invigiled and began to move toward her, but anxiety stopped him. He berated himself internally for feeling shy after everything he had been through, though he managed to steady his breathing and move forward. He saw that most of his peerage members were scattered around the room, interacting with other devils, and noticed Invigiled standing shyly alone. Anger rose as he realized that despite her lineage she was still treated as different, and he walked up to her to introduce himself. Invigiled stepped back and looked fearful. Issei raised his hands in a placating gesture and explained that he had not meant to startle her and was only greeting her. Invigiled apologized, blushing, and gave her name as Invigiled Leviathan. Issei introduced himself as Issei Haidu, the Red Dragon Emperor, with a small bow. Rias approached and asked whether Issei was disturbing Invigiled. Issei rolled his eyes and did not respond. Invigiled reassured Rias that they were only talking and repeated her introduction with a nervous courtesy. Rias introduced herself as Rias Gremory, and the two high-class devils exchanged polite conversation before Rias excused herself when she saw Kaneko and Kiba leaving. She followed them, expecting Issei to accompany her out of concern for their comrades, and was surprised and annoyed when he did not. She resolved to speak with him as soon as she returned. A few minutes later, a soft song began to play and the courtyard filled with dancing couples. Vali walked beside Issei on the way to the Gremory estate and remarked that Issei had grown stronger. Issei attributed his new strength to the information Vali had given him, which had motivated him to improve. Vali admitted he had expected Issei to abandon his former peerage and go rogue after connecting the dots, but Issei explained that he had considered it and ultimately decided to stay and work his way up. When Vali asked how Issei had gained so much power in just a month after their first clash, Issei said that Tannen had created a time-lapse barrier that extended the months of training into 4, without going into further detail. Vali then asked what exactly Issei was there for. Issei doubted that Vali had come solely to help them in the fight, and he asked about Vali's true motives. Vali replied cryptically that he had something he wanted from Loki, something he intended to take as Issei sealed him. Issei nodded with narrowed eyes and led Vali to the room assigned to his team. As he was about to walk away, a maid informed him that someone had come for him. He followed the maid to the lounge and found Invigiled waiting there nervously alongside Lady Gremory. Upon entering, Issei bowed and acknowledged Lady Gremory. Lady Gremory explained that Invigiled had wished to speak with him and that she had summoned Issei so they could talk afterward. Issei agreed and turned his attention to Invigiled. Issei stepped forward and embraced Invigiled briefly and gently, offering comfort. Invigiled reacted with a startled, embarrassed flush but leaned into the reassurance. Issei broke the embrace and apologized for leaving her alone in the hall, expressing concern for her. Invigiled said she had come to check on him because she had been worried after not seeing him following the party. She fluttered her hands anxiously as she spoke. Issei took her hands to calm her and assured her that she need not worry, he would not die easily. He stroked her hands with his thumbs, and Invigiled relaxed, pressing her face to his chest to hide her blush. Issei then gently pushed her back and reminded her that he had a battle to prepare for. Invigiled tilted her head, asking what battle he meant. Issei explained that the Gremmery and Citri peerages, along with the White Dragon Emperor, would confront Loki the next day and that he would be serving as the vanguard alongside the White Dragon Emperor. Invigiled burst into a rapid stream of anxious questions about how he would fight, why he had agreed to go, and what would happen if he were hurt. Issei calmed her with a steady shoulder shake and reassured her that he would not be fighting alone. A powerful ally would watch his back. He reminded her that he had been weaker in the past and injured before, but he was much stronger now and expected to be fine. He asked why she was so worried about him. Invigiled admitted that he was the first friend she had made since coming to the underworld and that she had no other peerage members to rely on, so she did not want to lose him. Seeing the sadness in her eyes, Issei gently stroked her cheek until she closed her eyes and leaned into his hand. He promised that he would return. When she asked what would happen if he were hurt, Issei offered an incentive. If he returned, he would claim something of hers that she could not give to anyone else, a private, meaningful promise between them. Invigiled blushed and looked away, then agreed on the condition that he come back in one piece. Issei smiled and kissed her forehead, telling her to get some rest and that he would see her after the fight. Invigiled nodded and teleported away in a magic circle. Venelina entered with her arms crossed and commented that it had been an interesting meeting and incentive. Issei confirmed the sentiment without turning. Venelina asked whether Issei would no longer be courting her daughter. Issei told her that was exactly what she should believe. Venelina dropped her arms and raised her aura to a higher tier, high-class level in an attempt to intimidate him, a show of power that even Rias flinched at, but Issei remained impassive. Venelina questioned why he had stopped courting the daughter he had fancied a month before. Issei replied that life experiences had changed him and that he had already discussed his decision with Surzex, who had agreed wholeheartedly. He excused himself to prepare for the upcoming battle and left, leaving Venelina to ponder his words. Issei headed straight for Surzex's office to cash in the favor owed by the Mao. He knocked and waited. Grafia opened with a slightly puzzled look, indicating that Surzex had not expected visitors. Issei asked to speak with Surzex about something urgent. Grafia asked him to wait while she spoke with Lucifer, then returned a few minutes later and motioned for him to enter. Surzex greeted Issei with a smile and asked how he could help. Issei observed that Invigiled's integration into the Young Devil Society had likely not been as smooth as planned and challenged whether that had been the case. Later, Azazel addressed the assembled peerages and teams. Azazel explained that their plan was for all of them to attack Loki and hold him off until Mjolnir could be delivered, and that Issei would then use it to seal Loki. Azazel emphasized that the sealing required Issei specifically, because only his power output would be sufficient. Along with Azazel, Surzex, Grafia, and Invigiled, the larger group assembled to hear the plan and prepare for the operation. Surzex and Grafia stepped forward and presented a box of Phoenix Tears, explaining that they had not been able to secure one for everyone because of their scarcity but hoping these would suffice until the end. Grafia handed a box to Rias. Rias and Sona acknowledged it with grateful nods while Issei and Vali watched with mild boredom. Before Surzex could teleport the group to Loki's location, Invigiled approached Issei and asked him to take care of things. Issei smiled, took her hands and gently stroked them. He reassured her that he would return before she knew it, pressed his forehead to hers in a quiet moment, and then stepped back. Issei and Surzex noticed the anger and jealousy in the faces of the female members of the Gremmery peerage, while Vali watched the display with amusement glittering in his eyes. Surzex then teleported the group to Loki's position. Upon arrival, Rias glared at Issei as if demanding an explanation. Issei ignored her and moved to stand beside Vali. The two of them, with Rosweiss joining as a representative of the Norse faction, regarded the fluctuating green magical pyramid in which Loki had been temporarily sealed and discussed how they would confront the god of mischief. Rosweiss declared her intention to fight alongside them out of duty, and the three settled into formation, each prepared to contribute their strength. The magical barrier around the pyramid collapsed, and Loki drifted out, the familiar smug expression on his face. He muttered that he should have expected Beelzebub to act underhandedly, then sneeringly accused the demon lords of sending others to do their fighting. Issei shot back with a smirk and a cutting remark about Loki throwing a tantrum because his father had not given him what he wanted, provoking visible anger in Loki before he collected himself and announced his intent to kill them all and usher in a true Ragnarok. Rosweiss tried to reason with Loki, urging him to stop and suggesting that Odin would forgive him if he surrendered, but Loki insisted he was cleaning up his father's mistakes and that allying with lower species insulted their great faction. Vali observed that diplomacy had clearly failed and braced himself for battle. Loki snapped his fingers to begin the fight. A large wolf, Fenrir, appeared through a magic circle and growled at the assembled group. Loki then produced two smaller, wolf-like creatures from magic circles at either side of Fenrir. They were his children, Hati and Skoll. Raising his hands once more, Loki fired a beam that expanded into a vast magic circle and summoned Midgardsormr, the Midgard serpent. Issei assessed the foes with a casual remark about the unfavorable guest list before bringing out Ascalon and activating boosted gear. Vali released Divine Dividing and gathered his magic while Rosweiss silently channeled her own power. Rias and her peerage organized quickly. Rias decided that she, Sona, Akino, and Tsubaki would take on Midgardsormr. Kuroka volunteered to handle Hati while Biko accompanied her. Arthur and Lu Fei paired off to face Fenrir, confident in their tools for the job. Kiba assigned the five of them Zenobia, Irina, Kaneko, Saji, and himself to deal with Skoll. With assignments settled, the teams moved to confront their targets. Zenobia launched a wave of holy aura at Skoll. Irina invoked her blessing to strengthen the attack, and the augmented aura drove Skoll back until the mystic wolf slammed against the mountainside. Saji seized the moment and activated Absorption Line. A pale purple tether from his sacred gear wrapped around Skoll and began drawing out the wolf's magical energy, causing it to falter. Kaneko then propelled several large boulders at Skoll, while Kiba plunged his sword into the ground and called forth multiple blades to pin the creature in place. The combined assault held the wolf fast, and Irina and Zenobia synchronized a powerful crosscut with their blades that struck true and caused Skoll's form to disperse in a brilliant flash rather than leaving any grisly trace. The five nodded to one another, ready to assist elsewhere as needed, and turned their attention to the surrounding battles. Hati growled and barked a warning as he spotted the two yokai standing before him. Despite the warning, Kuroka and Biko paid it little heed. Neither showed the slightest sign of intimidation. Biko smirked and mocked that the creature was trying to be cute. Kuroka shrugged and dismissed him, making it clear she was not interested in mutts. Biko offered a flirtatious remark and asked what type she preferred, and Kuroka brushed it off, saying her tastes did not include monkeys. She turned her attention back to Hati, who was pressed to the ground and ready to spring. Hati launched himself at the pair, but they evaded his attack with practiced ease. Biko clicked his tongue in irritation, pointed his staff, and commanded it to extend. The adamantine staff elongated and struck Hati on the head, sending him tumbling and leaving him briefly stunned. Kuroka seized the opening, circled behind him, and unleashed concentrated bursts of demonic magic and sage energy. Neither she nor Biko relented. They pressed their advantage without mercy. They focused their strongest sage techniques into their blows and struck Hati simultaneously. The combined assault from two high-tier S-rank supernatural beings overwhelmed him. Hati's energy was quickly extinguished and he collapsed, motionless. Kuroka and Biko regarded the fallen wolf with cool indifference before turning to the ongoing battles around them. Fenrir reared on his hind legs and charged toward Arthur and Lu Fei. Both moved constantly to avoid the giant wolf's paws and fangs. Arthur sidestepped every attack with a calm expression. He held back from a killing strike because Fenrir was a god-class being and could not be destroyed by ordinary means. Instead, Arthur was charging magic into his Excalibur ruler to break Loki's control and insert a compulsion that would bind Fenrir to Valus's team. Lu Fei hovered at a distance, watching her brother closely for the subtle cue that would allow her to restrain the wolf. This mission's purpose had been to secure Fenrir, and she was prepared. When Arthur finished charging, he gave a slight nod to his sister. Lu Fei landed and intoned an incantation, calling forth adamantine chains from the ground. The chains erupted and wrapped around Fenrir, pinning his jaws and limbs. Arthur stepped forward, raised Excalibur ruler, and felt for the focal point of Loki's influence. He drove the blade through the ethereal knot of control, disrupting and scattering the corrupted magic. As the compulsion took hold, Fenrir began to shrink until he was the size of a large husky. In that smaller form he trotted to Lu Fei, wagged his tail, and barked happily. Lu Fei giggled and petted the dog while Arthur shook his head at the absurdity of a godlike beast turned into a companion. He then turned his attention toward the Dragon Emperors and the Valkyrie opposing Loki. The two Dragon Emperors and their queens faced off against the Midgard serpent. The serpent initiated the assault with a powerful jet of fire aimed at the four young female devils. Tsubaki flew into the line of attack and activated a mirror. The fire struck the mirror and vanished, and the reflected force rebounded back against the serpent, pushing it backward. Sona explained to Rias that the sacred gear could rebound any attack with double the force. Rias admitted that the gear was formidable and could put a power-based peerage at a disadvantage. As the four dodged another breath attack, Sona asked Rias about Hyudokuin. Rias replied that she was unsure. He had been distant and aloof since returning from training, and he had even turned away Asia when she sought closeness. The topic passed quickly as the battle demanded their full attention. Rias formed a protective shield for the group while the others prepared counterattacks. Sona summoned a giant serpent of water that coiled tightly around a copied form of the Midgard serpent. Tsubaki released a spread of dark mist that swirled around the target, and Akino unleashed a torrent of lightning that combined with Sona's water serpent. Tsubaki detonated the mist with a snap, and the phantom serpent collapsed to the ground. Rias surged her power and disintegrated the fake Dragon King's body, eliminating the threat. With that resolved, they prepared to rejoin the others and assess the wider situation. Issei called upon Ascalon. Drake called out the boost and blade commands, and boosted gear and Ascalon appeared in Issei's left hand. Albion announced the vanishing dragon balance breaker, and in a flash of white light Vali donned his scale mail. Issei noted that Vali had used the balance breaker from the start, and Vali responded that he was surprised Issei had not followed suit, implying Issei was not taking the fight as seriously as he should. Rosweiss intervened, telling the two to stop bickering because they had a fight to win, and she began to float. Rosweiss channeled her magic, forming an overwhelming number of magic circles and launching long-range attacks. The sheer number and force of the spells left both Issei and Vali in awe. They had expected her to be powerful, but this exceeded their expectations. Loki, however, was in another league and casually deflected the barrage. Vali seized the opening and closed to engage Loki in close combat. Loki dodged a haymaker, then countered with a quick strike that sent Vali flying into Rosweiss, and the two of them crashed to the floor. Seeing his summoned creatures defeated, Loki clicked his tongue in annoyance and unleashed a concentrated blast of magical energy toward the group. Before the attack could make contact, a giant golden shield sprang up around them. Issei stepped forward with Ascalon glowing the same color as the shield and invoked the Hiten no Mitsurugi secret art, 10,000 Deaths. Simultaneously, Drake issued a massive boost and explosion transfer. Issei swung Ascalon. The shield detonated outward and cancelled Loki's assault. Everyone was surprised by the coordinated maneuver. Only Loki and Arthur looked genuinely stunned, while the members of the Gremory and Citri peerages openly gaped at the blend of skill and power on display. Drake then proclaimed the Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker, and in a flash of red light Issei was clad in scale mail, ready for battle. Issei signaled that it was time to begin, and he and Vali launched themselves at Loki, starting the decisive clash. Issei slashed with Ascalon, and Loki dodged the strike but was forced to use his hands to block Vali's punch aimed at his midsection. Rosweiss seized the precise moment to strike from behind with a powerful magical attack that connected and made Loki grunt. That brief lapse of control was all Issei and Vali needed. Vali landed a heavy haymaker to Loki's abdomen followed by a vicious hook that sent Loki flying toward Issei. Dragons synchronized another boost and explosion transfer, spawning a reddish-black aura that focused into Ascalon. Issei channeled the energy and unleashed the dominating divine slash, sending a red wave of power that struck Loki and knocked him into the ground in a loud explosion. The three combatants hovered in the air, watching the smoke with tense anticipation. A gust swept the smoke aside to reveal Loki standing and smirking, barely marked and with an amused glint in his eyes. He acknowledged that the three of them had each managed to land an attack and said he would have to take the fight slightly more seriously. He then raised his power, vanished in a burst of speed, and reappeared in the center of Vali, Issei, and Rosweiss. With a shout he unleashed a strong wave of magic that slammed the trio into the ground. Loki began to collect an immense amount of power and declared his intent to bring Ragnarok upon the world, preparing to funnel the energy into the interdimensional space. Rosweiss warned him that doing so would disrupt the balance in that space, but Loki laughed and released a vast torrent of magical energy anyway. Drake warned Issei to prepare for the incoming blast. Issei called for Vali's assistance as he raised Ascalon and Drake chanted to amplify them. Vali responded and unfurled blue ethereal divine dividing wings, readying himself for the impact. Rosweiss flew behind the two and cast her strongest shields in front of them. The torrent rained down. Albion activated a half-dimension defense. Absorbers from the wings began to work on the incoming waves, but the sheer volume of Loki's magic overwhelmed their mitigation. Drawing on the additional power from his boost, Issei spun Ascalon in a circle and formed the Shield of Triumph, a golden-red barrier that supplemented Rosweiss' wards. Despite their combined defenses, the attack breached the shields and struck the group, producing a massive explosion. When the smoke cleared, Issei stood at the forefront, sword in hand. His balance breaker was cracked and collapsed, leaving him in his base form. His clothing was heavily damaged and torn from the blast. Behind him stood Vali's team, the Gremory Peerage and the Citri Peerage, all mildly injured but unharmed in any life-threatening way. Issei and Vali had absorbed most of the attack's force. The others were astonished to see Issei still standing after taking such a hit. A rumble to one side drew Issei's attention. Vali emerged from the rubble, his jacket and shirt shredded beyond repair, carrying Rosweiss, who was unconscious. Issei noticed the fierce anger in Vali's eyes and felt a flicker of confusion at his expression. Vali answered Issei's unasked question by explaining that she had saved his life by stepping in front of him. Issei cracked his neck and noted that they would have to push themselves further to beat their foe. Vali, setting Rosweiss gently beside the group, admitted that for once he would put aside his personal vendetta and fight for someone else. Their gears reacted. Their boosted gear and divine dividing flared with red and white light, temporarily overwhelming everyone's vision. Even Loki watched the spectacle with interest. When the light faded, Vali noticed that his divine dividing now bore 10 feathers instead of 8, and Issei found that his gauntlet had extended to his elbow, sprouted more spikes, and gained a second gem. Drake announced that the boosted gear had reached its 4th liberation, and Albion confirmed that the divine dividing had reached its 4th liberation. Vali confronted Albion about the secrecy, questioning how they could access beyond the 3rd liberation, and Albion answered that only one person in the history of the sacred gears had ever reached that level and the one beyond it. He had not wanted Vali to chase a pipe dream. Vali nodded inwardly, still clearly upset by his dragon's secrecy. Issei asked who Albion had referred to. Drake identified his strongest host as Belzerd, the only one in history to unleash the boosted gear's true potential without Juggernaut drive, then warned that the mystic lightning hammer was approaching and urged them to prepare. Issei and Vali powered up. A reddish-black aura gathered around Issei and a whitish-blue aura gathered around Vali. The auras flared outward and then they became enshrouded in their respective forms as their balance breakers activated Drake's Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker and Albion's Vanishing Dragon Balance Breaker. Issei's scaled mail appeared more streamlined with additional jets and gems. Vali's armor displayed more wings and heavier plating. They launched toward Loki, who released a purplish aura and met them head-on. The three clashed like waves of red, white, and purple light SRNG across the sky. Loki dashed back to create distance and then unleashed a torrent of magical energy. Albion invoked a reflection, manifesting a blue shield in front of Vali that sent the attack back. Loki raised his own shield to stop the return blast, but Drake seized the opening, propelling Issei forward with extraordinary speed. Issei positioned himself before Loki's shield with Ascalon ready. Drake commanded a piercing transfer, and Issei's downward strike shattered the shield and drove Loki into the ground. Mjolnir arrived in the area through a magical circle. Issei told Vali to hold Loki off for a moment because he was the only one with enough power to wield the hammer. Vali nodded and they separated. Issei seized Mjolnir and flew toward Vali's position while Drake began an intense, sustained boosting that pushed Issei to his limits. Issei felt the strain and pain accumulate from the long, exhausting fight and the force of the hammer itself, but he kept going. He warned Vali to duck, and Vali immediately moved aside. A purple line leapt from Saji's hand and wrapped around Loki, restraining him. Drake then commanded an explosive transfer, causing Mjolnir to swell to a colossal size. With a fierce cry, Issei swung the hammer down onto the bound Loki. Loki cursed the red and white dragon emperors and vowed vengeance before being encircled in a magical circle and transported away. When it was over, Issei released Mjolnir and floated back down. As soon as he touched the ground, his balance breaker disintegrated. He offered tired, grateful smiles to Saji and Vali. Saji returned the smile, and Vali smirked and nodded. Vali told his team to move out. Lu Fei created a transport circle, and the members of Team Vali departed with a downsized Fenrir following them. Issei sank to the ground, exhausted from the afternoon's battles. A few moments later, Phoenix tears were distributed among the more injured members of the group, including Issei, Rosweiss, Saji, and Kiba. Once the mission was complete, Rias and Sona created their own magical circles and took their servants back to their family estates. At the main hall, Surzex congratulated everyone for a job well done after reading the official report, then dismissed them to their rooms for the night. In his room, Issei made sure to lock the door before taking a quick shower and lying on his bed, his last thought lingering on a certain purple-haired woman. The next morning, Issei walked calmly toward Surzex's office to finalize arrangements for his transfer to Ingvild's peerage. Rias hurried to catch up to him, calling for him to wait, and Issei suppressed a groan before giving her a respectful greeting. Rias asked where he was going, and Issei lied that he was meeting Surzex about sacred gear upgrades. Rias asked if it would take long and requested that he join her in the courtyard afterward. Issei nodded and they parted ways. Grayfia ushered Issei into Surzex's office and informed him that Ingvild was already there. Issei hurried a bit faster when he heard this. A moment later, Ingvild barreled into him, and he returned her embrace with a warm, mutual hug. Surzex watched the interaction with a gentle smile and chose not to interrupt. Issei gently ended the hug and placed a chaste kiss on Ingvild's forehead, which made her blush. Surzex then cleared his throat and spoke in an official tone, explaining that the demon lords and several clan heads had unanimously decided that Issei would be transferred into Ingvild's peerage as her king. Ingvild brightened and accepted. Surzex turned to Issei to confirm whether he wished to be transferred into Ingvild's peerage, and Issei affirmed that he did. Surzex instructed them to follow him and said he would inform Rias so they could perform the ritual to complete the transfer. As they left, Issei murmured to Surzex that the situation had been well arranged, and Surzex offered a faint, approving smile. When the group arrived in the courtyard, Rias and the rest of the Gremry peerage were waiting. Rias greeted them politely, though her irritation was visible at the sight of Issei so close to Ingvild. Surzex announced the council's decision. Since Ingvild was new to their world and had yet to form her own peerage, the council had chosen to transfer Issei to her. The reasons were practical. Issei's strength would protect Ingvild, and some clan heads had felt the Gremry peerage had become overly powerful and needed balancing. Rias protested passionately that Issei was her beloved pawn, pleading silently with Issei to contest the decision, but Issei had already agreed to the transfer. Surzex spoke firmly and demonstrated a slight display of power to stress the finality of the decision. Rias reluctantly complied and released the magic that freed the 8 pawn pieces from Issei's chest. Ingvild stepped forward to begin the conversion ritual. As the queen piece formed and prepared to merge, it unexpectedly shifted form just before entering Issei, which surprised everyone present except Issei and Ingvild. Surzex then declared the ritual complete, explained that Issei would need to travel to Ingvild's territory and that his belongings would be delivered there, and informed them that he had enrolled Ingvild as a transfer student at Kuo Academy. Ingvild created a transport circle and took Issei with her to the Leviathan territory under her jurisdiction, a region separate from the Elder Demon Lord's holdings and near the Citri, Phoenix, and Bale lands. Once they arrived in one of the castle's living rooms, Issei took Ingvild's hand and pulled her into a gentle embrace, placing his hands lightly at her waist. Ingvild blushed but did not pull away. Issei reminded her of the bet they had made 2 days earlier and asked if she remembered. Ingvild shyly nodded yes. Issei then asked if she wanted to share a kiss, and Ingvild quietly agreed. They drew closer, holding each other's gaze, and shared a soft, tender kiss that conveyed all the emotions between them without words. After a long, quietly cherished moment, they separated, both smiling and glowing with renewed warmth. Issei could not help but wear a goofy grin as Ingvild snuggled deeper into his chest to hide her bright red face. For the moment, everything felt right. The next day, Issei watched Ingvild leave her room and enter the lounge of the large Leviathan mansion and asked if her bags were packed, calling her princess. Ingvild flushed at the nickname, pouted, and told him not to call her that, scolding him playfully. Issei smirked inwardly and feigned innocence, asking what she meant by princess. She glared and insisted that that was exactly what she meant, glaring all the more when he teased her. When she threatened to walk away in mock annoyance, Issei wrapped his arms around her and reminded her gently that he called her that because she was his princess. Ingvild's blush deepened at the contact, and she only stayed quiet for a few moments. When Issei asked again if her bags were ready, she nodded, and he smiled. He kissed the top of her head in a tender, protective gesture, took her hand, and said that they would be going home. Surzex had arranged for them to stay at the renovated Hayadu mansion. Ingvild then asked what they would tell his parents if they asked for an explanation. She tilted her head in an endearing way as she asked. Issei turned a little sheepish and explained that Surzex had instructed him to use the girlfriend card. The official story would be that they had met at camp, fallen for each other, and were now a couple. Ingvild buried her face in her hands to hide her blush, then clarified that she did not mind being introduced as his girlfriend. Issei gently reassured her that they could change the story if she preferred, then, taking her hands, asked if she wanted to make it official and go out with him. Ingvild stuttered an enthusiastic yes, red-faced and overwhelmed with happiness. Issei's grin grew impossibly wide. He lifted her chin, leaned closer, and placed a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips. The kiss was a quiet, heart-stopping moment for both of them. After they broke away, they shared a second, tender kiss before pausing to look into each other's eyes. Both of them were flushed and breathless from the emotion. Issei rested his forehead against hers and whispered that it had been amazing. Ingvild could not find her words. She simply smiled, her thoughts pleasantly scattered. He squeezed her hand and led her away for one final luggage check before they returned to the human world. At the Gremory mansion, in Surzex's office, Surzex sat in his chair with a stony expression that revealed little. Graphia, his wife and most trusted companion, stood at his side with the familiar composed aloofness that hid her true feelings. In front of them, Rias stood with anger and tears visible on her face, her emotions worn plainly for all to see. Rias demanded to know why Surzex had handled things the way he did, arguing that he knew how she felt about Issei and that someone else could have been assigned for Ingvild's protection. She insisted that even if Issei had requested a transfer, Surzex should have forced him to remain with Rias instead. Surzex answered calmly, reminding her that Issei knew she had once let him die and that she could have disposed of the fallen in her territory or warned him. He argued that Issei would likely have accepted her help, and that the real risk was that Issei might have left. To prevent that, Surzex had used his influence to ensure Issei stayed where he would be safe and content. He explained that he would do the same again if it meant keeping someone like Issei from running away. Rias protested, arguing that her own happiness mattered and that they could have reached an understanding through discussion. Surzex replied that Issei, as the Red Dragon Emperor, was invaluable to the devils and that while Rias had managed to pull him into their faction by whatever means, her methods had been risky. He emphasized that Issei's current happiness and importance outweighed Rias's personal claims at this time. He ordered Rias explicitly not to involve Issei's parents in any manipulations and forbade her from confronting Invigiled while Invigiled stayed in the human world, warning that he would notice any such actions and that the consequences would be severe. Rias gave him one last teary glare, stood, and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her in a flood of anger, despair, and disappointment. Once the door shut, Surzex's shoulders slumped and he leaned back in his chair with a tired sigh. The burden of leading an entire people weighed heavily on him. Surzex rubbed his forehead to ease a headache that threatened to split his skull. He felt Grayfia's hands massaging his shoulders, working out the tension that had built up from the recent events. He groaned in relief and muttered that it felt just right, which made Grayfia smirk. She enjoyed the quiet control she had over the strongest devil alive. Grayfia soothed him, saying that at least the worst was over now and that it was up to the others to iron out the remaining problems. Surzex only nodded, too tired to speak. Back with the Gremory peerage, Rias stormed through the corridors, furious and unwilling to accept what had just happened. She could not believe she had lost Issei and that her brother had not acted. She felt as if the world were against her, and she promised herself she would find a way to bring Issei back. Being forbidden to confront Invigiled did not stop her. She resolved to use her charm and the strength of her peerage to win him back. A plan was already forming in her mind as she rejoined the others. Rias entered the lounge and informed the peerage of her conversation with Surzex. Silence fell over the group. Aquino broke the silence with a mischievous smile and asked what they would do about the situation, clearly picturing ways to pressure those who had driven Issei away. Rias explained that they could not act because Surzex had specifically forbidden her from confronting Invigiled. Asia asked what they would do next. Rias outlined two plans. One was to challenge Issei in combat and defeat him, forcing him to return to their peerage. The other was to try to win him back through charm and sincere appeal. Asia warned that trying to charm him might not work, noting that Issei had shown little reaction since returning from his training trip, and the others fell quiet, acknowledging the truth of her words. Kiba then offered a solution. He suggested that he and Zenobia challenge Issei to a sword duel with the condition that, if Issei lost, he would return to Rias's peerage. Rias approved the idea and ordered everyone to prepare. Aquino stood and began arranging a transportation circle to take them back to the Hyudu residence so they could train and prepare for the match. Elsewhere, Issei and Invigiled had just arrived from the Leviathan territory at the Hyudu household. Issei had moved Invigiled's belongings into the room next to his, and the two rooms were connected by a door to allow easy access in case of emergencies. After arranging her things, Issei took her hand and gave a small questioning nod. Invigiled inhaled deeply and nodded in return. She wore a lilac, long-sleeved blouse embroidered with flowers, blue jeans, and sneakers, her hair tied up in a high ponytail. Despite the casual outfit, she looked striking, and Issei found it hard to keep his eyes off her. Issei himself wore a black-fitted long-sleeved shirt and blue jeans. Taking Invigiled's hand, he led her to meet his parents and greeted them both cheerfully. Their parents responded with warmth and curiosity, asking where the other girls were and who the young woman was. Issei introduced Invigiled as his girlfriend and explained that they had met at camp, grown close, and started dating a few days earlier. He said he was surprised when she told him she was transferring to Kuo, so he had offered for her to stay at his home. His mother remarked that Invigiled was too pretty for him, and his father teased about how Issei, despite being a pervert, always attracted girls. Issei bristled at being talked about as if he were not present. He crossed his arms, pouted, and complained that this was why he did not bring many friends home. Invigiled laughed quietly at the family's dynamic and blushed at Issei's pout, finding it endearing. She composed herself and told Mr. and Mrs. Hayato that Issei had only spoken well of them and had treated her with respect. Their first interaction had been when he asked her to dance at the camp's opening party. Mrs. Hayato, delighted, took Invigiled by the hand and led her to the kitchen for a bit of girl talk, leaving Issei to watch with a small smile as he imagined a future with green-eyed, purple-haired children running around. Mr. Hayato noticed the expression on his son's face and asked, with a slightly more serious tone, whether Issei was sure about his feelings. Issei answered that it felt right, telling his father that he was certain. Issei confessed that he did not know what to do. Being with her made him happy and brought him peace. So far they had only taken a chance to see how things would go, but he wanted a serious relationship with her and perhaps marriage one day. Kenshin nodded and patted his son on the shoulder, giving his blessing. Issei asked his father if the family had any heirlooms, perhaps a sword. Kenshin thought for a moment, rubbed his chin, and then his eyes lit up. He said that there was indeed a blade and asked why Issei wanted it. Issei explained that he had developed an interest in kendo and wanted a family heirloom to practice with. Kenshin agreed it was a fine reason and went to the basement to fetch the sword. While he waited, Issei sensed the occult research club behind him. He turned slowly, raised an eyebrow, and asked how he could help them. Rias, unsettled by the blank expression on the normally expressive Issei, folded her arms and announced that she had come to issue a challenge. She proposed a swordsman battle between Issei and her knights, stating that if Issei won he could remain in Invigiled's peerage, if he lost he would return to her peerage. Issei replied that he saw no reason to entertain the request. He insisted he was no longer anyone's pawn and pointed out that he had once faced a god and pushed him back twice using his blade work. He doubted Rias's knights could match his skill. Kiba looked slightly hurt while Zenobia appeared unconcerned. At that moment Kenshin re-entered carrying a katana. Although the sword looked old and slightly rusted, Issei felt a current of power emanating from it and heard a subtle whisper as if the blade were calling for him. Drake, speaking inside Issei's mind, identified the sword as the Crimson Princess and noted that it had given his second-strongest host many problems. That wielder had been a direct descendant of Kenshin named Urahara Kisuke, who had been more skilled with the blade than Kenshin himself. Issei murmured the name Urahara Kisuke to himself and then let the conversation drift from his focus. He thanked his father for finding the sword and took it into his hands. The power intensified and the blade seemed to vibrate, as though eager to communicate. Issei decided to accept the spar, but scheduled it for 1 week so he could become accustomed to the new weapon. Rias agreed to meet at the training grounds in 1 week. She then turned and led the members of the occult research club away. Issei walked Invigiled to her room and told his mother that he was taking her there. His mother, Kanami-ai, bowed politely and expressed that it was a pleasure to meet Invigiled. Invigiled returned the bow and followed Issei to her new room. Issei showed her the room, mentioned that his own room was next door, and offered to help if she ever needed anything or wanted to go shopping for decorations. Invigiled blushed and hesitated, then thanked him softly. She expressed her gratitude with a shy smile and a gentle gesture before going into her room. Issei stood outside, dazed for a moment, until the door closed behind her. He returned to his room and sat on the bed, but was soon drawn into his mindscape. The empty void he usually saw had transformed into a city. A soft voice told him that it was glad he had finally arrived. Issei turned toward the voice and asked who it was. The voice said it had been trying to reach him since he was born and that such potential had not been seen since it had been with Kenshin and then Kisuke. Issei realized he could not recall the name Drake had mentioned. It seemed to escape him. He focused on the present, noting that he was here and ready to find out what would come next. Issei asked what he should do. A voice then asked him what he would do if someone close to him, like his parents or his girlfriend Invigiled, were in danger. Issei answered that he would do anything in his power to ensure their survival. The voice probed whether he would sacrifice his emotions, and Issei replied without hesitation that he would. When asked whether he would give up his limbs and be left crippled, Issei again affirmed without question. Finally, when the voice asked whether he would forfeit his life if necessary, Issei declared that he would, without a doubt, if it meant saving the person he cherished. The figure then vanished and the city briefly shone. A feminine voice praised him from behind, and a gentle hand rested on his shoulder as a warm whisper brushed his ear. The voice urged him to call out her name, but before he could finish the scene melted away and Issei opened his eyes back in the real world with a name on his tongue. Issei commanded Beneheim to awaken. The rusty old blade in his hand transformed into a glossy crimson sword with a scarlet handle. He stared at it in awe, calling it beautiful. The voice of Beneheim answered softly in his mind, and Drake, the old dragon, affirmed that she was indeed the perfect weapon to accompany their balance breaker. Beneheim then informed him that, now that he had awakened her, it was time for training. She offered to teach him all of Kisuk's techniques, noting that he was already well versed in Kenshin style. Issei insisted that Beneheim was not merely a weapon to him but his partner and companion, and she replied with gratitude. He made his way to the mansion's training area, a space custom-made for him by Azazel, glancing at the sword and expecting that by the end of the week both Kiba and Zenobia would be no match for him. 1 week later Issei stood opposite Kiba and Zenobia in the training ground. Both opponents had their swords out and took up opening stances, while Issei held Beneheim loosely in its base form with a casual posture. Kiba questioned why Issei had not assumed a formal stance, feeling slighted by the apparent lack of respect. Issei dismissed the concern with a relaxed shrug, implying that his current stance was more than sufficient for opponents like Kiba, which made Kiba bristle. Zenobia then asked whether Issei would use Ascalon. He replied that he preferred Beneheim and felt more at home with it. Zenobia bristled at any perceived slight toward the holy sword given by Lord Michael, and Issei clarified that he respected Ascalon but simply favored his new blade. Kiba cut off the conversation and launched himself at Issei at top speed. He slashed at Issei, who leaned back and then swung Beneheim so that Kiba had to abandon his sword and leap back. The exchange unfolded quickly, and the members of the Occult Research Club watched in surprise as Issei not only matched Kiba's speed but surpassed him in technique. Issei chuckled at their shocked expressions and taunted them to make the match more interesting. Kiba and Zenobia exchanged a look and then reappeared in front of Issei in coordinated attack. Issei dodged Zenovia's powerful strikes and deflected Kiba's fast, precise blows with his own movements. After several minutes he grew tired, whispered the name of a technique, and vanished in a red flash before reappearing 10 meters away. Issei gestured with Beneheim toward his opponents and challenged them. Zenobia responded by channeling holy magic into Durandal and firing it at him while Kiba released a torrent of fire and ice. Issei grinned, called for Beneheim to awaken, and watched as the rusted form shifted into the regal crimson blade. He swiped at the incoming attack and dispersed it, but a new threat arose when multiple demonic holy swords erupted from the ground. Forced to react, Issei blocked a heavy swipe from Zenobia and then pushed her back with sheer strength. Using another dash he created distance and decided to end the spar. He called for Beneheim to fully awaken and unleashed a sweeping strike that sent a surge of red energy racing toward Kiba and Zenobia. The blast hit them and created a dramatic burst of light and smoke consistent with intense, high-energy training. When the smoke cleared, both Kiba and Zenobia lay unconscious, stunned and bruised from the impact. Issei returned Beneheim to its dormant state. Rias rushed forward in alarm and demanded how he could strike his friends like that. Issei responded that it had been a fight and that if Rias had wanted to protect them she should not have set the challenge in the first place. He then told her that since he had won he expected her to honor her side of the agreement and to keep her distance from him. Issei warned them that if they bothered him again he would be forced to tell Surzex, and he clarified that they were not his friends. He accused Kiba of being involved in the events that led to his death and said he did not know Zenobia. He dismissed the fight as boring and admitted he did not care before leaving the Tiri group that was the Occult Research Club. After the spar, Issei walked lazily toward his room. He took a shower to freshen up and, feeling refreshed, went to Invigild's door and knocked. A few minutes later, Invigild opened the door in a simple t-shirt and trousers. Even in casual clothes she looked radiant. She blushed when she saw Issei and asked if he needed anything. Issei blushed, gave an embarrassed chuckle, and scratched the back of his head. He steadied himself, smiled warmly, and asked Invigild a very important question. He had to restrain himself from acting too impulsively in the charged moment. He then asked her if she would like to go on a date with him. Invigold's face lit up and she smiled shyly, answering that she would like that. Issei said he would pick her up the next day at 2 o'clock, and she nodded her approval before retreating to her room. Issei stood outside, happy and already making plans for the date. Issei's excitement quickly became something more complicated than simple joy. Elation, hope, and love mingled with worry, hesitation, and fear, creating an internal turbulence he could hardly sort. Drake intervened inside his mind to calm him, telling him that everything would be fine and advising him to relax and go with the flow. Drake reminded Issei that he was no longer the weak human he had been before, that he had faced gods and survived, and that he was not being driven by the same impulsive weaknesses as before. Beneheim added reassurance, saying that she sensed no ill intent from the purple-haired girl and would have noticed if there had been any danger. Feeling bolstered by their words, Issei thanked them and went to get ready. Invigold, meanwhile, was panicking about her first date. She had never been on a date before and worried she might ruin it. She grabbed an enchanted mirror and connected to her mother. Their conversation was warm and teasing. Her mother asked who the lucky young man was and said she would have a talk with him to make sure he was not someone who would take advantage of her daughter. Invigold explained that he was the Red Dragon Emperor and that he had become important to her. Invigold recounted to her mother how they had met. Her formal introduction into society had been met with a cool reception, then Issei had asked her to dance in a way that made the others look away from her. He had protected her when Loki attacked, kissed her forehead in a gentle, reassuring gesture, and promised to return. Surzex transferred him into her peerage, and he introduced her to his parents before asking her on a date. Elena observed that he seemed to be a nice and well-mannered boy. Invigold agreed simply. Elena then offered to help Invigold get ready and assisted her in choosing several dresses for the evening. Several hours later, Issei stood nervously outside Invigold's bedroom, contemplating how to proceed. He wore a black shirt, blue jeans, and a brown jacket. Taking a deep breath and ignoring the faint sniggers of his tenants, he knocked and waited. When the door opened, Issei found himself briefly speechless. Invigold stood in a silver kimono, her long purple hair arranged in an elegant bun held by a small red ribbon, and a light touch of makeup enhancing her features. Invigold shyly asked how she looked, and Issei told her she looked beautiful and that he had been momentarily lost for words. Invigold flushed at the compliment. After a few moments of quiet, Issei suggested they get going and hoped she would like what he had planned. They left the house and first went to the local cinema. Inside, Issei let Invigold choose the movie, and she picked the latest Godzilla film, The King of Monsters. Issei was pleased he was a big fan of the series and was glad she enjoyed it as well. After the movie, they went to a restaurant and shared a simple meal with several dishes that were new to Invigold because of her Western upbringing. The kimono had been her mother's suggestion, believing Issei would appreciate it because of his Japanese roots. Throughout lunch, Issei smiled as Invigold tried different foods, enjoying the wonder on her face. He found it hard to look away. When Invigold noticed he seemed distracted, she asked if something was wrong and reminded him they needed to leave. Embarrassed, Issei nodded, and they left for the evening festival. At the festival, Issei led Invigold around the stalls, playing games and winning small prizes. He also showed her some of the traditional rituals couples performed to wish for their relationship's well-being. The festivities continued until midnight, when Issei brought her to the highest point of the grounds for a clear view of the fireworks. Invigold thanked him for the day and said she had enjoyed it. Issei expressed his gratitude for her company, and they shared a quiet, heartfelt moment as the fireworks began. By the time the display ended, Invigold had fallen asleep. Issei gently saw that she was asleep and decided to take the longer route home rather than teleport, content to savor the evening. It had been several days since the date, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm that made Issei happy. His days were filled with school, homework with Invigold, training, and more time spent together. Both had grown closer, and Invigold sometimes showed more confidence in expressing her feelings, though she retained a shy demeanor that Issei found endearing. On this day, Invigold was with her mother, who had some respite from alliance duties and was spending time with her daughter, So Issei trained alone. He practiced using Beneheim alongside his balance breaker, working through spells Beneheim had been teaching him from the lost magical art of Kido, focusing on both the destructive Heido and the binding Bakudo forms. With a roar, Issei unleashed an arc of energy that punched a dramatic hole through the training wall in a flashy, anime-style display. He then released his balance breaker form, returned Beneheim to her base mode, and knelt to catch his breath. Drake praised him for pushing his training session longer than before and noted that the new fighting style was coming along well and would be formidable once complete. Beneheim, speaking through their mental link, complimented Issei's progress in combining his power-based approach with Kenshin's close-range techniques and Urahara's mid-range magical style, an unusually difficult synthesis that suited him well. Issei decided that was enough for the day. He was brought out of his thoughts by the sound of clapping and turned to see Surzex standing with an amused expression. Issei offered a wobbly bow and asked how he could serve. Surzex told him there was no need for such formalities. Surzex replied jovially that he was there in the capacity of an older brother rather than as the leader of an entire race, waving his hand to emphasize the point. Issei grinned and straightened, asking how he could help his older brother. Surzex explained that he had come to get away from the office for a while because things had been hectic with the raiding game tournament and the Cows Brigade. He added that the elders believed the tournament was perfectly safe and did not require extra security, dropping the remark as a deliberate hint. Issei, who had become notably sharper after honing his blade arts and receiving tutoring from both Beneheim and Drake as well as his transformation into a dragon, nodded slowly and pointed out that such complacency was careless. He observed that if the Cows Brigade had an insider, they could strike during a game and cause serious trouble. Surzek's eyes brightened when he realized Issei had understood. He confessed that he had warned the elders but they had not listened and that he was particularly worried about tomorrow's game, which involved the siblings of two super devils and where trust could not be assumed. Issei smirked and asked his older brother for a suggestion about an idea he had been considering. Surzek's eyes twinkled as he asked what the idea was. Issei said he was thinking of attending all the games to help the king prepare, explaining that as Queen of the Leviathan he wanted to gather intelligence, believing that good information amounted to half a victory. Surzex praised the plan and invited Issei to join him in the guest area, mentioning that several other leaders would be present. Issei accepted and asked if there was anything else. Surzex asked where Invigiled was, noting that he had expected her to be with Issei. Issei explained that Azazel had recently sent Invigiled's mother on a short vacation, and Invigiled had gone to spend a few days with her before they both returned to work. Surzex said that made sense, expressed his anticipation for the raiding game the next day, and told Issei that Azazel would pick him up an hour before the match. They shook hands and Surzex returned to his office. As soon as Surzex left, Issei's smile faded and a grim, determined expression settled over him. He said they would have test subjects to try their new powers. Beneheim responded eagerly that she would finally be used in a real battle situation and that she looked forward to the thrill of combat after many years without a proper test. Drake added that they would be able to send a clear message to the underworld and that Issei's previous unsuitable reputation was not something to maintain. Issei assured them that a new image of the Dragon of Domination would soon be seen, and a dark, reddish aura surrounded him, making the air feel heavier. A communication circle then appeared near his ear, interrupting his thoughts. He cut off his aura, raised an eyebrow at the circle, and accepted the call. Invigiled greeted him cheerfully over the connection, her voice sounding noticeably brighter after time with her mother. The warmth in her tone made Issei, briefly, forget the battle awaiting him the next day. Issei asked whether she and her mother were well and when she would return. Invigiled said she was fine and that her mother was tired but doing okay. She added that she would return when the new term began. She then told Issei that her mother had asked her to invite him over for dinner the next day and asked if he could come. Issei apologized and explained that he had important work the next day, offering instead to visit that weekend. Invigiled agreed and said she would see him on the weekend, signing off cheerfully. Issei ended the call and went to take a shower. The next day, Issei sat with Odin, Azazel, and several other high-profile members of the Alliance as they waited for the raiding game to begin. He sipped his drink idly while Odin and Azazel traded loud, colorful stories about Odin's visit to a notorious club owned by some of the fallen angels. From Odin's vivid descriptions, Issei thought his old, indiscreet self would have jumped at the chance to visit, but his current self found the idea less appealing. Issei then noticed that Rias and her peerage had been transported into the arena for their match. He felt the tournament beginning and quietly started to power up. Down in the arena, Akino looked around and noted that there were no visible signs that a raiding game was about to take place, her voice carrying her confusion. Rias agreed that something was wrong and frowned at the odd surroundings. Before she could demand an explanation, Asia suddenly screamed in pain. The peerage turned and saw Asia being held upside down in a magical cage that had been cast by Diodora Astruth. Rias shouted furiously at Diodora, demanding that Asia be released. Diodora replied that Rias should have traded Asia when given the chance. Diodora declared that everyone would die at the hands of the original Demon Lord as an army of the old Demon Lord faction emerged through a large number of magic circles. He ordered that if Rias wanted her bishop, she should reach the castle in an hour. He would play a game for her, and then he vanished into a green magic circle. The old Demon Lord faction's soldiers charged toward the woman they sought to kill. Rias and her peerage readied themselves, hoping against hope for a miracle. Back with Issei, he activated Crimson Princess and engaged the boosted gear. He signaled Odin and Azazel, took to the air, and waited for the opportune moment. That moment arrived when the traitor Astarath vanished through a magic circle and the old Demon Lord faction pushed forward. Issei summoned his power, his blade and eyes flaring, and called out for Crimson Princess to answer him. A crimson arc of magic descended from the sky and cut down several surprised soldiers. Encased in reddish-black mist, Issei appeared with dragon-like wings and green eyes, a scarlet blade gleaming with fierce intensity. He told Rias to go rescue her bishop and that he would handle things there. Rias immediately ran toward the castle with her peerage close behind. Once they left, Issei addressed the remaining soldiers of the old Demon Lord faction, offering them one chance to pack up and run and warning that they should not look back. When one brave soldier nodded, Issei's grin turned feral as he declared that they would be dead if they stayed. He released a concentrated surge of killing intent, and Crimson Princess's unleashed power overwhelmed many of the troops. After a few seconds of tense silence, the whole army charged with a loud battle cry. Issei responded by unleashing several scarlet arcs that felled a large number of soldiers. The attackers pressed forward. One soldier launched himself at Issei, and Issei moved with a burst of speed, appearing in the middle of the attackers and sending many of them sprawling. When others created magic circles and fired torrents of energy, Issei raised Crimson Princess in a defensive stance and formed a red shield to hold back the attack. The shield held, but Issei was pushed back before he dropped it and pointed his sword at the attackers, invoking a slashing technique that sent high-speed, shard-like crimson projectiles tearing through the front lines and breaking their formation. Two devils attempted to sneak up behind him, but Issei vanished in a flash step and reappeared behind them, quickly neutralizing the threat. He observed that the opposing force had thinned considerably. The wings of Azazel and Odin were also showing signs of wear from the fight. Refocusing on the remaining group, Issei began a chant calling on infernal forces and finished by unleashing a powerful crimson sphere of energy. The projectile blasted through the low-class devils' shields and detonated among them. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield bore the marks of the attack, smoldering embers and scorched ground where the enemy had stood. Azazel flew up to Issei, took in the scene, and whistled in astonishment at the scale of the devastation. Azazel commented on how extreme the sight was, and Issei shrugged and insisted that none of it was his doing alone. Azazel teased Issei about how far he had come from being a useless pervert a few months before. Issei credited Vali, Draig, his sword spirit, and Crimson Princess for opening his eyes and helping him grow. After a brief silence, Issei said he intended to deal with the traitor, and he asked Azazel what he planned to do. Azazel replied that he would go to Surzex and help wrap things up. Issei nodded and then flew toward the castle where the raiding game between Diodora and Rias was taking place. Rias entered the throne room with her peerage and demanded that Diodora let Asia go. Asia was bound to a structure behind him, restrained but alive. Diodora taunted Rias, claiming that Ophus's blessing had made him stronger and that none of them could stop him. He vowed that they would all die that day, his hazel eyes glinting with manic confidence. A new presence in the room drew everyone's attention. Issei had arrived, appearing casually at a window with Crimson Princess at his side. Diodora narrowed his eyes, surprised that he had not sensed Issei's approach, and insulted him as a filthy half-breed. Issei had entered through the window and mocked Diodora's self-assessment, questioning whether Diodora could really claim to be smart. Issei sarcastically remarked that he had expected the man to be different given Beelzebub's reputation. Diodora cursed and unleashed a large amount of magic at Issei, producing a small explosion. Diodora laughed maniacally and boasted that this was the power of those blessed by Ophus. Issei, already behind Diodora, unleashed a basic energy blast, striking Diodora and blasting him into a wall where debris buried him. Issei then turned to the structure holding Asia and drove the Crimson Princess into it, activating the sword so it released fast-moving shards of magic that slowly overpowered the structure. Diodora pulled himself free from the rubble and laughed, insisting the crucifix had been forged by a high-tier Longinus annihilation maker and that a second-class weapon like Issei's could not scratch it. Issei offered a bored glance and observed that anyone who believed that was even more foolish than they seemed. The structure collapsed, and the blonde nun went to her knees, panting. Grasping the Crimson Princess, Issei fixed his gaze on a now fear-stricken Diodora. For a few moments Issei's face was blank, then a fierce smile surfaced as he and the Crimson Princess emitted a sharp aura of intent. A reddish-black aura surrounded him and his emerald eyes began to glow. Diodora stammered a plea, but Issei vanished and reappeared in front of him, delivering a cutting strike with the Crimson Princess. Diodora screamed as the blow landed, and Issei continued his assault. Moving at blurring speeds that would have challenged even Kiba's night abilities, Issei struck Diodora repeatedly around his body. Finally Issei stopped, turned away, and executed the heavenly sword technique he called the Thousand Lily Cuts. Diodora collapsed, rendered unconscious and severely hurt. Rias and her peerage watched with a mixture of fear and awe as Issei had just incapacitated a high-class devil, the brother of a demon lord, with devastating efficiency. Rias cautioned Issei that he had just struck down an heir to one of the 72 pillars and asked if he understood the consequences. Issei replied casually that Diodora was not dead, that he had avoided vital organs, and that devil healing would ensure his survival. For all intents and purposes, Diodora was only unconscious. Issei then sensed something above the throne and snapped his head upward. A green magic circle appeared and a handsome, regally dressed man materialized, clearly leagues above Diodora in power. Issei tilted his head and asked who the newcomer was. The man declared himself one of the leaders of the old Demon Lord faction, the heir to the original Demon Lord Beelzebub, and introduced himself as Shalba Beelzebub, appointed executioner for the day. Issei responded with a drawl and called on the dragon. In a flash of red light Issei appeared in scale mail, power and intensity radiating from him as he spread his wings and flew up to openly challenge Shalba. He taunted that Shalba's army and accomplices had been weak and that he hoped Shalba would be enough to satisfy the Crimson Princess's hunger. Shalba bristled at the disrespect and snarled that he would teach Issei his place, raising his hand to form a golden pillar barrier around Issei. Issei retaliated before Shalba could complete the spell as the dragon activated a boost that produced an explosive surge. Using that surge, Issei created a large fireball and launched it at Shalba, forcing Shalba to cut his spell short to avoid it. Issei then used a flash step to appear in front of Shalba and executed a reversed finishing cut with the Crimson Princess, striking with the blunt part of the blade and sending Shalba flying through a wall and out into the distance. The blow left Shalba grimacing from broken bones, but he quickly refocused. Though Shalba held greater raw magical power, Issei's versatility and effective tools more than closed the gap. Gathering and shaping large amounts of magic, Shalba unleashed a swarm-like assault that formed an orb of corrupt power around Issei. Issei countered by engulfing himself in controlled fire and dispelling the swarm. Before Issei could recover fully, Shalba closed in at point-blank range and unleashed a strong demonic strike that sent Issei crashing to the floor, followed by 5 quick magical orbs that detonated nearby. Shalba had no time to check the result before a white-armored hand struck him from behind. Coughing and dazed, Shalba turned to see Vali. Shalba asked with a pained cough why Vali Lucifer had betrayed the old demon lords. Vali answered coldly that it was nothing personal, but that the only one allowed to kill his rival was him, and with a sweep of his hand he sent Shalba flying into the distance. Shalba did not get a chance to land and recover as Issei burst through the smoke and with a single swift slide overwhelmed him. Turning to Vali, Issei removed his helmet with magic and told him in a deadpan tone that he had everything under control. Vali smirked and replied that sitting out of the action was not something he liked. Issei sighed and asked why Vali was here and how he had arrived without being detected. Vali pointed upward and explained that he had Ophis bring him, and when Issei followed the gesture he saw a small black-haired girl floating in the air. Issei asked why Vali had used her as transport, visibly uneasy in the presence of such a powerful being. Vali answered that he wanted to see someone, and when Issei looked where Vali was looking he found himself staring at a breathtaking sight. High in the sky hung the largest European dragon he had ever seen, a majestic red celestial dragon defined by 4 gigantic wings and a horn on its snout. Vali declared that Great Red was his goal, the one he wanted to surpass, and that his dream was to beat him and claim the title of the White Dragon God of Supremacy. Issei smiled and called it a mighty goal. Vali explained that they would have their destined battle in the future, but for now there were many other opponents he wanted to face, so their rivalry would not be his primary concern. Issei said there were several things he wanted to achieve as well and teased Vali that he should prepare for eventual defeat by his hand. Vali returned the taunt with a grin, then turned and vanished through a silver magic circle. Ophis vowed to Great Red that one day she would defeat him and reclaim what she had lost before disappearing in a wisp of black smoke. Everything settled, Issei sighed and deactivated both his balance breaker and boosted gear. Floating down to the ground, he scratched his head and made a small grimace at the stains on his clothing. Azazel and Surzex landed beside him, looking fairly relaxed. Issei asked if everything had gone according to plan. Azazel said it had gone even better than planned and reported that the Cows Brigade had been reduced by 2 of its factions. Surzex clarified that with the fall of Kokabeel they had routed the fallen angel contingent, and after today's failed invasion the old Demon King faction was gone. All 3 of their leaders had been defeated, and it was only a matter of time before their armies finished off the remaining forces. Issei asked about the other houses and was told that Curisuri Asmodeus had been dealt with that day, Shalba Beelzebub had been defeated by Issei, and Azazel had eliminated Kateria Leviathan 2 months earlier. The Lucifer clan remained under Rizvium Lucifer, though he had been inactive for centuries, so currently they faced no threat from that quarter. Surzek's face darkened at the mention of Rizvium, and when Issei asked if Rizvium was related to Vali, both Surzex and Azazel showed looks of displeasure and sorrow. Azazel explained that Rizvium was Vali's grandfather and, to put it mildly, not a good person. Vali had endured a very difficult childhood because of him. Surzex urged Issei, in a serious tone, to promise that he would run as fast as he could if he ever encountered Rizvium, regardless of the circumstances. When Issei asked what was so bad about him, Surzex said that Rizvium's beliefs made human notions of devils seem sane, that he possessed an enormous reserve of magical energy and power, and that he ranked just behind Surzex in strength and slightly ahead of Ajuka. Surzex added that only his and Ajuka's presence kept Rizvium in check. Issei shivered at that description and nodded in agreement. Azazel then told Issei to get going and that they would handle the cleanup. He added that he had it on good authority that Issei's girlfriend was waiting for him. Without delay, Issei stepped into a red magic circle and returned to his room, leaving Azazel and Surzex chuckling at the scene. Once inside, Issei took a quick shower to freshen up and then went downstairs, where he found Invigiled talking with Rosweiss. Issei announced his return, which made Invigiled brighten and turn toward him. Invigiled immediately rose and embraced him warmly, and he returned the affection. Invigiled said she was happy to see him but asked why he had come back so soon, noting that she had expected him to spend more time with his mother. She explained that Azazel had sent Rosweiss to her after Odin left without her, and after they had settled the details, Rosweiss had agreed to join Invigild's peerage as a bishop. Invigild mentioned that it had taken a mutated piece to resurrect Rosweiss. Issei praised Rosweiss as a very powerful warrior and welcomed her. Rosweiss said she was glad to be there, that conditions in the underworld were far better than in Valhalla, and that the pay was excellent. Issei said he was glad she liked it. Invigild asked curiously whether Rosweiss planned to join the school as well. Rosweiss replied that she would have to speak with Azazel but would most likely join as a teacher, shrugging. Invigild smiled and told Issei that she was happy, then began to recount the time she had spent with her mother. A few days later, Issei enjoyed a quiet family dinner with his parents, Invigild, and her mother. The situation in the underworld had settled and the old Mao faction had been defeated. Now Issei sat idly in a chair by the window, waiting for class to begin and wondering when Invigild would enroll. He knew she had been homeschooled and was shy, but he pushed the thought aside as the classroom door opened and the homeroom teacher entered. The teacher announced that there were 2 items to cover. A transfer student would be joining the class and there would be a change in homeroom because the teacher had been reassigned. The teacher then called in the transfer student. Invigild entered shyly and introduced herself as Invigild Leviston, explaining that she had recently moved to Japan with her mother and asking to be treated kindly. The girls in the class tittered at how well she spoke Japanese, and 2 boys began to make suggestive comments. Issei moved quickly to stop them, delivering a firm tap to each of them and scolding them for making her uncomfortable. He sat back and ignored his classmates' surprised looks at the change in his behavior. The teacher thanked Issei for his help and instructed Invigild to sit next to him so he could show her around during the break or after school. Issei motioned for her to take the seat beside him. Invigild's expression suggested she disapproved of his using magic on a human, and Issei expected she would want to talk to him about it later. The door opened again and Rosweiss entered as the new homeroom teacher. She addressed the class and explained that the first item on the agenda was the upcoming class trip to Kyoto. The principal and the other teachers had decided that this year's trip would be extended to 2 weeks instead of the usual 4 days. The class would stay at a top-tier resort, be guided around the city, and visit several historical sites. Rosweiss asked if there were any questions. Issei asked whether they would have to stay in uniforms or could dress freely. Rosweiss replied that students could wear their own clothes but would need to check with their assigned teacher, adding with a touch of humor that it would not do for any students to get lost in a city as big as Kyoto. Asia asked when the trip would take place, and Rosweiss answered that it would happen a week from now. With no further questions, Rosweiss began the day's lessons. During lunch, Issei stood and offered to show Invigild the cafeteria and the student council room, saying they could finish the tour after school. Invigild agreed and followed him, both ignoring the murmurs of their classmates. Issei knew that by the next day strange rumors would likely start, but he and Invigild continued on. They collected their lunches and went to the school roof. Issei snapped his fingers to create a small barrier that kept ordinary students away, providing them a quiet place to talk. He turned to see Invigild standing with her hands on her hips, tapping her feet in impatience. Issei asked why she looked irritated, speaking in a light, teasing tone. Invigild glared and told him she knew exactly why she was annoyed and asked him not to play games. Issei reached out and took her hand gently, closing the small distance between them as he asked what she meant. Invigild, cheeks slightly flushed, confronted him about using magic on a human to influence that person's decisions. Issei explained that he had done it mainly to have a chance to spend more time with her, and when she reacted, he smiled and offered a playful, nonchalant nudge to her forehead. Invigild pouted but then huffed that she could not stay mad at him. Invigild told him he was way too charming for his own good. Issei replied with a grin that he was only that charming when she was around, and that this side of him belonged to her and to anyone she deemed worthy of sharing him with. Invigild tilted her head in mild confusion and asked what he meant by anyone she deemed worthy of sharing him with. She knew that harems were common in the supernatural world and that Issei had every right to seek whoever he wished, so she was surprised that he wanted her approval. Issei gently moved a strand of her hair behind her ear, and they shared a brief, affectionate moment. He told her that he had lost himself before and that this time he had her. He trusted her choices more than his own. Invigiled did not reply, but his words warmed her heart. They then sat down to eat lunch. While they ate, Issei looked into the distance and proposed that they form a club of their own. Invigiled asked what he meant. Issei explained that the Citri peerage made up the student council while the occult research club belonged to the Gremory peerage, and suggested forming a club for their own peerage that could include future peerage members. He suggested that Rosweiss could serve as their advisor so everything would fit properly. Invigiled liked the idea and asked if they would need permission from the headmaster. Issei explained that, because this was devil territory and 2 high-class devils already had peerages here, they would need one of those devils to process the paperwork. He recommended asking Citri, who seemed used to these matters. Invigiled agreed to talk to Citri after school. Issei expressed surprise that she was on familiar terms with Citri, and Invigiled said they had met after his fight with Loki and that Citri had been pleasant. The rest of the day passed without incident. After school, the Leviathan peerage walked to the student council room. Invigiled knocked on the door and waited. Tsubaki opened it and was surprised to see them. She allowed them in and led them to a back room with sofas. They waited briefly before Sona entered the room with Tsubaki. Sona greeted Invigiled and asked what she could do for her. Invigiled explained that she wanted help establishing a club for her peerage. Sona asked if they had a specific idea or theme for the club. Issei suggested making it a music band and proposed the name New Direction, addressing the suggestion to Sona. Sona asked if they were sure about that choice. Issei confirmed that they were certain and said it would take time to recruit other peerage members but that they would be fully functional by the end of the year. Invigiled and Rosweiss nodded in agreement. Sona said that before they could recruit members they would need a club advisor and a manager, noting that a manager was necessary because this would be a band rather than a typical club. Rosweiss offered to be the band advisor, and Sona accepted. Invigiled quietly volunteered to be the manager, since she preferred not to perform. Sona agreed to handle the necessary paperwork and arrange a club room and instruments, and she expected the band to be up and running by the time they returned from the trip to Kyoto. Invigiled stood, shook Sona's hand, and left the room with the others. Issei idly stared out of the bus window as the second-year class of Kuo Academy traveled for their annual trip to Kyoto. Invigiled sat next to him with her head resting on his shoulder and slept softly. Many of the boys and girls on the bus glanced their way, the boys because Invigiled's beauty matched the great ladies of Kuo, and the girls because they thought Issei should be more reserved. Issei did not care about their opinions. He sighed, put in his earphones, and began playing music. As he looked out the window, he felt that the upcoming trip might bring trouble. He could not explain it, but the air felt heavy, and a faint tension seemed to grow as they neared Kyoto. He knew that somehow, one way or another, he would once again find himself stuck in the middle of another conspiracy. He kind of liked the feeling. It gave him a thrill. The journey continued at the same pace and the group of second years from Kuo Academy reached Kyoto a few hours later. As soon as they arrived, Issei gently woke Invigiled before the two stepped off the bus. Once outside, Issei closed his eyes and extended his awareness to the surroundings. He preferred to be alert for any hidden dangers. Finding nothing significant, he opened his eyes and followed his classmates to where the teachers were waiting. When the entire year had gathered, Azazel informed them that they would be checking into their resort soon. The school had arranged 2 sets of rooms for each class. Homeroom teachers would coordinate and report as needed, and everyone should settle into their rooms before meeting again in a couple of hours. With assent from the students, the large group split by class and the teachers led them toward their rooms. Issei trailed behind Rosweiss with his classmates. The tension in the air became noticeable. He tensed and prepared himself. Drake and Beneheim acknowledged his readiness with small nods and channeled a little power to help him enter a fighting stance more easily. After everyone had settled into their resort rooms, Issei excused himself from the other boys and walked out with the intention of speaking with Azazel. Something about the place did not feel like a simple school trip. He found Azazel alone in the lobby, approached him, and asked for a private word. Azazel looked up with a lazy smile, led them to an empty corner, said a few privacy words, and asked what Issei wanted to discuss. Issei said he felt as if they had walked into a temporary war zone and asked if everything was okay. Azazel admitted that they did not yet know what was happening but that he had already sent word to Gabriel and Seraphal. They were expected in a couple of days to consult with the yokai higher-ups. Until then, Azazel advised it would be best to stay on guard and be ready for anything. Issei agreed to keep watch and report anything he discovered. Azazel smiled, dismissed him, checked the time, and with an hour before the sightseeing departure, went to the bar for a small drink. Among the girls of Class 2A, Invigiled was growing increasingly annoyed by classmates who hovered around her, intent on protecting her from Issei Hayu. She told herself that Issei was protective and caring, and that the others did not understand him. She excused herself and tried to move away, but Asia and Irina stopped her. Invigiled asked how she could help, and Asia replied quietly that they had a favor to ask. Invigiled followed them to a quieter spot and asked them to speak. Irina explained that she wanted to meet Issei to thank him for his actions during the Kokabeel incident and for his role in the peace conference. Invigiled approved and then looked to Asia. Asia said she wanted to thank Issei for saving her from Diodora and to ask a personal but harmless question born of curiosity. Invigiled agreed to arrange a meeting between Issei and the two girls but clarified that she would not influence any decisions he made afterward. Both Irina and Asia nodded. When the conversation ended, Invigiled and the rest of the girls left the room to meet the rest of their year for the sightseeing trip. Outside, the girls of Class 2B joined the boys and teachers in the lobby. Invigiled noticed Issei talking with Kiba but could not tell whether the conversation was serious or casual, as both boys kept neutral expressions and relaxed posture. Azazel, acting as head teacher, explained that everyone would be sorted into groups supervised by assigned teachers and then began reading the group assignments. Issei was unsurprised to find his group composed mainly of the supernatural second years, with Rosweiss assigned as their teacher. The groups dispersed, and the supernatural second years split within themselves, with Issei and Invigiled walking ahead of the others, arms linked. Invigiled asked Issei what he had been discussing with Kiba. Issei said that Kiba had wanted to apologize for his role in Issei's reincarnation, and Issei had responded that while he did not fully blame Kiba, they were unlikely to become close friends. At best they would remain cordial acquaintances. Invigiled then asked, somewhat reluctant and nervous, if he could do her a favor. She knew that her boyfriend did not like the occult research club, and this matter had the potential to make him annoyed and broody. Issei noticed her distress and asked what favor she needed, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. Invigiled explained that Irina and Asia wanted to talk to him and that she had promised to arrange a meeting. Issei slowly removed his hand from hers and turned away, his face blank. After a few moments of silence he asked when he needed to meet with them, addressing her with the formal title "My King" in a tone that did not betray the anger he felt. Invigiled asked him to hear them out if they approached during or after the trip, chastising herself inwardly as she registered the change in his posture. Issei agreed and deliberately slowed his pace, falling into step behind Invigiled and adopting an aloof, uncaring demeanor that contrasted with his earlier warmth. Invigiled frowned but could not find the words before a barrier descended around the group. Issei moved in front of her, Benihime drawn and lowered to a ready position, and called for whoever was there to show themselves, his voice carrying a trace of Draig's influence. A young girl of around 10 appeared at the tree line. She was a kitsune with 4 golden tails, flanked by several lower-ranking kitsune who acted as her escorts. Issei demanded to know who she was and why she had set up a barrier that threatened them. The girl identified herself as Kunu, the second daughter of Yasaka, and loudly accused them of kidnapping her mother before ordering her soldiers to attack. Issei accepted the challenge but kept his restraint in mind. He could not use lethal force because of the alliance's neutrality with the Shinto faction. He noted that the girl's attacks were driven by emotion and therefore unpredictable. Raising his sword, he engaged the approaching kitsune in fast, precise exchanges. He parried incoming strikes with Benihime, redirected several guards with controlled counters, and moved fluidly around the skirmish. When several blue fire orbs arced toward him, a summoned water dragon crossed his path and absorbed the energy, protecting him in a dramatic, stylized display. Issei grinned at Invigiled, nodded, and used a flash step to close the distance. He disabled a pair of attackers with non-lethal strikes that sent them tumbling back and out of the fight. The young Kitsune assumed a defensive stance with only a handful of guards remaining. Issei raised Beneheim overhead and commanded the blade to awaken. He then brought the crimson sword down and released a sweeping arc of magical energy. The Kitsune burst into action to form a protective barrier. The arc overwhelmed their defenses in a bright, explosive flash of energy, knocking the guards back and clearing space around Kunu without causing gore or lasting harm. As the dust settled, Kuna found herself facing Issei with his sword leveled in a warning posture. She swallowed and looked up into his cold emerald eyes. Issei sheathed Beneheim and asked, calmly but firmly, why she had attacked an envoy from the Christian and Norse alliance. Kunu paled and asked if they were not the ones who had taken her mother. Issei reassured her that they were not and bent down to her eye level to hear what had happened as Invigiled and the others gathered nearby. Kunu explained that strangers had assaulted her home a few days earlier and had taken her mother. The only clue she had was that her mother had been used in a summoning. Her voice quivered and she began to cry, and Invigiled stepped forward to comfort her with a warm, motherly embrace. Issei muttered that this was a serious problem and instructed Rosweiss to send word to Azazel and request assistance. He then proposed that they go to Kyoto Palace and consult with the acting head about the next course of action. Kunu asked whether that meant they would help her, teary-eyed. Issei said that he could not promise what the leaders would decide, but he assured her that he would do his part to help find her mother. Invigiled nodded in agreement. Rosweiss asked who was currently managing the ley lines beneath Kyoto. Kiba and others. Looked puzzled and asked what ley lines she meant. Kunu explained that a vast network of magical ley lines ran under Kyoto and that it was traditional for a nine-tailed kitsune to be bonded to them and act as the region's protector. Her mother, Yasaka, had been the bond, and with her kidnapping the ley lines had begun to fluctuate. Kunu said her sister had temporarily managed to connect with the lines but could not sustain it for long. Issei consulted with the powers at his disposal. Beneheim admitted that this problem was outside her expertise. Drake suggested a temporary measure. Issei could boost and transfer energy to the young girl to bolster her physical and magical reserves, which would reduce the strain the ley lines put on her for the short term. Issei accepted the idea and decided they should go to Kyoto Palace to meet Kunu's sister and put the plan into action. Kunu thanked them and, relieved, took both Issei's and Invigiled's hands to lead them toward Kyoto Palace, the others following close behind. Issei looked over the magnificent building and noted that Kyoto Palace served as the headquarters of the Shinto and Yokai faction. Invigiled confirmed this as they approached. Kunu led the small group into the mansion and explained that she would introduce them to her older sister. The interior of the castle reminded Issei of the old Japanese samurai era, filled with portraits, numerous potted plants, and sliding doors. At last, the group reached an office. Kunu knocked and, after a prompt to enter, led everyone inside. Sitting at the desk was a girl about the same age as Issei and Invigiled, with blonde hair, 2 fox ears, and 5 tails. Issei registered that she had a striking appearance that could rival Invigiled's beauty. Narumi greeted them and asked who the visitors were, her hand twitching slightly as if prepared for sudden movement. Kunu excitedly identified the group as friends from the Christian and Norse pantheons who had offered to help find their mother. Narumi introduced herself as the acting leader of the Yokai faction. Rosweiss then bowed with the Kuo delegation and introduced the group. She identified herself as a bishop of the alliance, pointed out Invigiled Leviathan as the purple-haired member present, and named Kiba Yuto as Rias's knight. She identified Zenobia Corda as another knight of Rias, Irina Shidu as the ace affiliated with Michael, Asia Argento as a bishop associated with Rias Gremory, and finally Issei Haidu as the Red Dragon Emperor. Narumi's eyes widened briefly when she heard Issei's title, then she asked how they intended to help. Issei suggested they start by telling the full story, leaning against the door with his arms crossed. Narumi explained stoically that a few weeks earlier Kunu had been kidnapped by a sacred gear user while their mother was in a meeting. After the kidnapping news broke, their mother had gone out to find Kunu. They had only managed to recover Kunu, and their mother remained missing. Rosweiss asked if Narumi's mother still managed the ley lines in the area. Narumi said she could still sense her mother's connection to the ley lines but did not know her location. Issei asked where the highest concentration of ley lines in the area could be found. Narumi answered that the old Fox Kurama shrine was the center of the Kyoto ley line system and had the strongest concentration. Issei concluded that there was a good chance whoever had kidnapped Narumi's mother would be operating around that shrine. Narumi's eyes widened and she sprang to her feet as if to run, but Issei stopped her and urged calm, warning that rushing in without a plan would only endanger them. She paused, nodded, and agreed. Issei then said they needed Azazel's experience for a hostile rescue operation. At that moment Azazel appeared in the doorway and commented that he had arrived just in time. Issei asked when Azazel had shown up, and Azazel replied that it had been around the time Kunu had almost run headlong into a trap. Azazel proposed a frontal assault on the temple, reasoning that the enemy already held the advantage and that a sneak attack would be pointless. They should strike hard and try to neutralize as many opponents as possible. He directed the plan to Narumi. Narumi bowed slightly and asked Azazel to lead the operation, admitting that she did not have the experience to manage a rescue of that magnitude despite her regional authority. Azazel accepted the responsibility and ordered everyone to suit up, announcing they would leave in an hour. The group dispersed to prepare. Issei vanished in a flash step, still irritated by a request Invigiled had earlier made of him. He intended to comply but planned to make his displeasure known. Invigiled sighed quietly and resolved to speak with him later, but for now the rescue mission took priority. An hour later everyone assembled. Kiba and Asia wore their Crow Academy uniforms, Zenobia and Irina wore their swordsman attire, Rosweiss donned her Valkyrie armor, and Invigiled wore a mage outfit. Issei wore a red and gray battle kimono with Beneheim at his side, his wild hair loose and giving him a feral presence. Narumi found herself glancing at him more than once. Azazel outlined the movement. They would first meet Sona and her peerage a couple of miles from the temple and then reassess roles. He asked if everyone agreed, and the group confirmed their readiness. As they departed, Issei expressed to Azazel that he wanted to face the leader of the opposing force. Azazel cautioned that it would be unwise, noting they might face multiple strong opponents and that matchups would be chosen according to the skills present when they arrived. Issei accepted the reasoning and nodded. After a short 15-minute journey, the group continued toward the meeting point. The group led by Azazel soon arrived at the familiar sight of Sona and her peerage. Sona acknowledged them with a respectful nod to Azazel. Azazel asked Sona for a status update and whether she had found anything. Sona reported that Azazel's hunch had been correct. The enemy was present and appeared well prepared, with someone stationed a few miles out as a lookout. Azazel frowned as he worked out a plan. After a few minutes he decided that Sona and her peerage, with the exception of Saji, would establish and maintain a perimeter barrier around the area. Azazel explained that Saji, being a combat specialist, would accompany the forward team and that Invigiled, the magic user, would replace him at the barrier. Just before they split up,